With the beginning of OTAs, there's certainly been a lot of talk about who's there, who's not there. But maybe the talk should really be about, what OTAs is truly all about. So we'll do just that. Browns 3D on the OBR begins now. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends, your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound Browns 3D on the OBR streaming network. I am your host, Jeff Lloyd. We thank everybody who comes out to the OBR every day, whether it is to digest the written content from our fabulous staff of writers, or joining us here every evening on the OBR streaming network, beginning at 6 p.m. with Browns 3D, hosted by myself. Several shows throughout the week, and nightly Friday you will have Things I Think I Know, hosted by Brad Ward. So make sure you all stick around for that. I think everybody, and just in this week, and granted it was only 2 sessions, everybody gets caught up into it. And certainly there are things right now that matter for the Cleveland Browns as far as organized team activities matter, and some things that maybe don't matter just as much. But the Cleveland Browns can use every bit of this extra time that they have right now with the quarterback situation that they are trying to navigate their way through. This team is trying to figure out just exactly who is going to be the starting quarterback, just how fast and quickly they can develop two rookie quarterbacks to get them to the point where they might be able to get on the field and contribute as rookies, possibly early. You have a veteran quarterback in his fourth year in Kenny Pickett, into his third system in 4 seasons, trying to get himself acclimated to the point where hopefully he can compete as well. You have a 40-and-a-half-year-old quarterback who certainly does not need the extra seasoning, the extra work, just enough maintenance to keep a guy like Joe Flacco going. But something like this and OTAs, in the case of the Cleveland Browns, is certainly about the two rookies. The Browns quarterback situation in regards to the rookies is extremely unique. It's very rare that you have a team that has two young quarterbacks, let alone two rookie quarterbacks at the same time. One of the few teams I can truly remember going through this was certainly years ago, the Washington then Redskins, now Commanders, with for the third, who was drafted extremely high. And then later on, there was a player that they liked at the position as well, in Kirk Cousins, who they had also drafted. But that was a situation where it was RG3's gig. And, Kirk Cousins kind of was just somebody that was extremely high on their board, that they felt it was just too good to pass up to add him to the mix. Ideally, the situation probably was, hopefully RG3 pans out to be the guy we think he is. And then Kirk Cousins can be developed enough, and similar to Matt Schaub years ago, can possibly be moved to a team that needs a quarterback, allowing Washington to then accumulate the picks. It's different for the Browns in the fact that both of these guys were drafted, late third round, mid day 3, as Gabriel and, of course, Shedeur Sanders were. It's also different because I think the Browns would love for both of these guys to go down an accelerated path, for both of these guys to hopefully get to play as much as possible as rookies, because the Browns are going to have a major decision to make again in regards to the quarterback position in April of 2026, when the Browns hold 2 first-round picks, their own and the Jacksonville Jaguars, and the potential there for the picks to possibly be top 15, top 10. For all the Browns fans, I hope not top 5. So the fact that they want to get these guys as acclimated as possible, as quickly as possible, makes for this whole quarterback battle for four guys probably not really a battle of four guys. I think the Browns truly want to see how quickly they can get Shedeur and or Dillon or both over, the hump and into the conversation of how quickly either one of them can possibly play slash start. It's probably not fair to take a guy who was drafted in the third round, or even more fair, a guy that was drafted in the fifth round. We all know different circumstances regarding Shedeur Sanders, of course, and say that we want to base them on their rookie play. I mean, first off, basing a rookie quarterback, regardless of where they were drafted, even if they were drafted high, evaluating them off of 1 year isn't necessarily fair, because usually if you were drafting that high and you drafted, say, a Kyle Williams or somebody else, your team ended up with the record that they had, and it probably wasn't just because of the quarterback position. Your team probably had certainly many significant holes that led to your poor record, that led to your high draft position. So I continue to go back to this where whether it's Kenny, whether it's Joe, it's really just keeping the seat warm. And, I certainly think team success, the success of Joe and or Kenny certainly holds some weight here. But ideally, the Cleveland Browns would like to have as much of an idea on Shedeur Sanders and Dillon Gabriel and where they are at by the end of this 2025 season. That's probably one of the top goals that this team has, as far as not record, of course, but it's managing the roster and certainly, evaluating talent for the future. Now, either one of these guys, and look, I've said it. If you wanted to live in a world where you just said, look, I think we're just going to play the rookies, and your season and its fate could probably be exactly the same with Shedeur Sanders and Dillon Gabriel quarterbacking your team as it could be with Kenny Pickett or Joe Flacco. We know Joe had the lovely run here back in 2023, of course, but a man is 40 and a half years old. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. And, at times last year for the Indianapolis Colts, it was not a pretty sight. The fact that the Cleveland Browns are drafting number 2 overall, or did draft number 2 overall, was basically from Joe Flacco, basically just not being able to find a way to beat the New York Giants as the regular season was unfolding. Pickett, now look, obviously Kenny Pickett has been part of a team that, went to the playoffs 2 years in a row. His involvement in his second year, not as much as it certainly was his rookie year in Pittsburgh, of course. But again, the ceiling for Kenny Pickett, and look, it was a very soft trade that sent him from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia. It was another soft trade that sent him from Philadelphia to Cleveland. And whether or not Shedeur or Dillon Gabriel give you this magical rookie year in 2025, I'm not saying they can't. Ideally, I think you're going to see struggles from both of them when they do get them on the field during the regular season. And there's probably a strong case that there's nothing Shedeur or Dillon Gabriel can do to stop this team from drafting yet another quarterback, top 15, top 10, top 5, come next April. But I just don't know how, the evaluation process here of Flacco or Pickett in OTAs, in training camp, in joint practices, in exhibition games is going to be any more important than what you are going to see from Shedeur and Dillon Gabriel. In a perfect world, in an ideal world where Shedeur Sanders, draft cycle didn't go crazy bananas off the rails like it did, I don't think anybody would have been surprised if Shedeur went late in the first round, early in the second round, late in the second round, early in the third round. I think once we walked out of day 2 and Shedeur Sanders had not been drafted yet, I think that's when people really started to say, "Okay, this just does not make any sense whatsoever." Rightfully so. Now, again, I spoke on this yesterday. If you asked me if, where I had them both, I certainly had Shedeur Sanders as the better quarterback. No knock on Dillon Gabriel, just, height. Lefty quarterbacks don't really do much in the NFL. Um, the offense different at times from the 3 stops Dillon Gabriel went to, but not all that different and certainly had some similarities to it. So by the time, Dillon Gabriel was, 23 and, by the time he had turned 24, it kind of felt like Dillon Gabriel was maybe, a man playing amongst boys at that point where he'd really, had just gotten himself so comfortable, where he was light years ahead of, some 18-year-olds who were on the collegiate fields that he was playing against, of course. Same can kind of be said, of course, for Shedeur. Certainly younger than Dillon Gabriel. Um, Shedeur with a lot of pressure on him due to the last name on his back of his jersey, understandably so. But what we've seen from Shedeur, and with the spotlight being on him over the last month or so, is that, it's no longer looking at Shedeur Sanders, son of Dion. It's kind of looking at Shedeur Sanders, the Browns rookie quarterback from the University of Colorado. I think whatever the, pre-draft, during the draft, post-draft narratives were of Shedeur kind of seemed like they're going by the wayside. I think a lot of people just thought, he got by on his name, which in the time that we've seen him here doesn't seem to be the case. He's not showing up, very much at, public events. Maybe his working out is being a little bit more documented than some people necessarily want to see. And I'd say that's fair. But what we see for the most part is, just a young, kind of fun kid, kind of humble, just trying to find his way into hopefully becoming, a pretty decent professional quarterback. So this is certainly, what up until I guess it's June 19th or June 22nd when the Browns wrap up, their final round of OTAs, and that's of course after mandatory minicamp, where we want to see where Shedeur and Dillon are, and if the improvement level is there over the next month or so, you really got to believe. I guess 3 weeks would be more accurate. I think you really got to start to believe that these guys, and again, we always said we didn't think it was 25, 25, 25 as far as anybody having an opportunity to win this starting job. But you have to believe that these kids continue to progress, get more comfortable within the system, find ways to continue to have success, work well with, the skill players that are around them, that all of a sudden now, we're talking about that maybe that 25, 25, 25, 25 perhaps has become a little bit more of a reality, which would certainly be, the win-win situation for Coach Kevin Stefanski and the Cleveland Browns and certainly their offense. The Browns are probably at least 1 year away. There's a lot of other players that are going to need to develop over 2025 that, certainly will be make or break as to what the 2025 outcome is, but even more important, what the 2026 outcome for the Cleveland Browns would be. So again, it's going to be week to week. It's going to be month to month. And then once we get to, the end of the third preseason game in August, you're kind of have an idea as to, where the rookie quarterbacks are. Are they there? Are they knocking on the door? Have they not gotten onto the doorstep yet? Or are they still sitting out in the street in the car? If they're still sitting out in the street in the car, there is no hope for them. The Browns will have scouts going all over college campuses this fall, scouting every possible quarterback there is. Good chance it's probably going to happen anyway. But these guys, have a chance to basically create their own path. And that certainly is something that, what a week like this week means and the coming weeks mean for Shedeur Sanders and Dillon Gabriel. But it continues, whether it is, the duo of Quinshawn Judkins and Dylan Sampson. And, both uber talented players came out with fantastic resumes out of college. Their production, their athletic testing through the draft process, everything tells you that these guys certainly can be part of, what should be the new version, but also a very successful version of the Cleveland Browns running game, something that has been sorely, sorely missed. And I'm not taking a knock on Jerome Ford. I'm taking a knock on the overall consistency of the Cleveland Browns running game, which was such a tremendous thing for them in the early, mid, and certainly through 2023 for the Kevin Stefanski offense. Certainly, it goes hand in hand with the offensive line. And you do think, though, however, with better talent in Judkins and Sampson, and again, not a knock on Ford, because I think Jerome Ford has played a lot better than most other people will give him credit for. It should hopefully not put as much pressure on whatever quarterback is behind center for the Cleveland Browns. But most importantly, when it does come to the time where it is the rookie quarterbacks behind center for the Browns. Now, a lot of that, as far as the offensive line, it's going to hopefully have, you know, good things bestowed upon them as far as some players with age, Joe Batonio, some players with health, actually the rest of them, right? Posick, Teller, Conklin, and DeJuan Jones. And, that these guys, and I believe that's one of the biggest things, I think, and one of the biggest misconceptions about all this is I think a lot of people just think that these guys are just going to get back out on the field and the run game is just going to pick back up to where it always was. Well, again, Father Time is involved here. Injuries are involved here. Guys trying to get, can they get back to their prime? Can they get back to close to their prime? These are all significant factors, of course. Then, what you have with Jerry Jeudy. And this has really been the consensus. And I think I was one of the first guys to probably bring it up. But this has been one of the consensus of this week for the Browns is that right now, there is no question about who their best playmaker is on the offensive side of the ball. It is Jerry Jeudy. And frankly, it's just not very close. Catching everything that comes his way. His routes are crisp and explosive. He is separating from defenders and then running away from them once the ball is in his hands. I always talk about, players who went through the difficult time like Jerry Jeudy did. These guys had been dominant athletes their entire lives. Never once did they ever get to a point where maybe there was a little bit of self-doubt or, maybe this isn't, maybe it's a little over my head or, maybe I'm not the star. I'm not going to be the star in this league that I thought it was going to be. But then you get, Jeudy, who just went on an absolute tear last year. And, line, I got my smile back. Well, a little bit more important, Jerry Jeudy got his confidence back, got his swagger back. And, once that was relit within him, there was just, no stopping him. And, now totally comfortable again within his own skin, totally comfortable with himself in this league. The game in Denver, where he basically just went in and like, man, I am going to show you guys how stupid you looked and just went in there and essentially tore the place to the ground, even though the Cleveland Browns ended up on the wrong side of that game, of course. A guy like Harold Fannin, who not a lot of people are talking about, which I think works out just absolutely perfectly because, I think in the long run, saying, "Oh, well, the hope and the praise should be extremely high for the 3rd round pick out of Bowling Green," you know, phrasing it like that and, look, Harold Fannin is a very, very young player. Yes, he excelled last season for Bowling Green. Yes, he excelled against lesser competition, but he's still got a ways to go in his transition into the NFL. The tight end transition in the NFL is not an easy one. Just look at the early years of David Njoku, and you'll understand what I'm speaking on, of course. But just yet another player who comes in with a lot of talent and needs OTAs, needs mandatory mini camps, will certainly need camp, will need joint practices, will need preseason games to further his confidence level and hopefully further the Browns' confidence within him. On the defensive side of the ball, and we'll see where this gets to, certainly by the time August rolls around, are the Alex Wrights of the world good to go? Are the Mike Halls of the world good to go? Hopefully by then, Ronnie Hickman has been back for a while because, big opportunity certainly for a guy like Ronnie Hickman here to seize a starting role as a free safety here for the Cleveland Browns. But this is again what this time of the year is for. It's not necessarily for your veterans. It's certainly not necessary for your, future Hall of Fame best edge rusher in the NFL in number 95, Miles Garrett. Yes, in a perfect world, all 90 guys are there and all 90 guys are competing. Nothing's perfect. I think we're all well enough far down the path of life to understand that that is not a legitimate expectation. So again, I mean, it circles back and, whatever becomes of, the 2025 season for the Cleveland Browns, it's going to come down to the quarterback position. If it's bad in 2025, then we may have in the same conversation next January that we had this past January, where it was move it all. Let's move on from every single one of them and set the room again. Or it can be, Kenny Pickett played well, but the Browns don't have any interest in keeping Kenny Pickett around. And I saw somebody floating around where if Kenny Pickett played well, the Browns couldn't afford him. Read Jack Duffin from the OBR people. I cannot stress that enough. Or the Browns could end up in a crazy good situation where Shedeur Sanders and Dillon Gabriel play and both show well, and the Browns still decide to use a first round pick, of which they have two in April on a quarterback. And now all of a sudden they have a boatload of money because they're not paying the top position in the NFL any legitimate money other than a top 15, top 10, top 5 rookie quarterback contract. There's a million ways this can go. And, I think there's times, and I'm sure you guys go through this just as much as I do, where you can kind of sit down and, and this is probably one of the biggest issues people have as far as, having these football conversations, and it's certainly where social media is involved, is trying to actually look at other points, looking at other viewpoints, looking at other vantage points, trying to understand maybe some others' philosophy on how things could possibly work out. You know, I think, I've said, in a perfect world, if you think the Browns can win and contend in 2025, You start Joe Flacco and you see where you're at after 6 weeks. The Browns are saying a lot of nice things in regards to Kenny Pickett. Certainly, I feel he could be the guy for them that they think maybe is going to start week one. And again, evaluate it. Where are you at? Everybody talks about this first month and how difficult it is. All right, let's play the month and evaluate it. See where we're at. Or, I certainly can see the path, and it's probably the way more and more that I think I would go is I would just play the kids. Ideally, if I'm going to draft a quarterback in 2026 anyway, I'm only going to commit to either Shedeur or Dillon further, not both of them, because I'm already going to have another young quarterback in the room. So that would be the reason for getting them both enough playing time to at least decide which one of the two is your personal preference. For me, it would be Shador. I'm not saying, you ask me 5 months from now, I wouldn't say that, I'm not going to stand here and say that, oh, Dylan Gabriel couldn't change that for me. But for me, certainly right now, it certainly would be Shador. It's a lot going on for the Browns. It's certainly a lot for Coach Kevin Stefanski with four different quarterbacks. Certainly a lot for offense coordinator Tommy Reese with this amount of quarterbacks that you are going to work with, and try to make sure that everybody is on the same page as far as handling the offense, what the expectations, what the calls are, all of these things, and then also making sure you're getting enough practice reps, throwing reps for all four of them. So when you're starting to make these decisions, you're making them openly, fairly, and hopefully basing it on an equal amount of opportunities for all four of the guys involved. And, of course, a lot of that's going to have to do with, the wide receivers playing well for the remainder of the spring and the summer. Fannin and Njoku hopefully being able to give, real legit workloads through the remainder again of spring and summer. So everybody's just getting this fair evaluation period for Cleveland. There's just so much that goes into this, and so many different ways this can break for the Cleveland Browns. And at times it's hard to comprehend. At times it's hard to believe just how all of this is going to work out. And certainly makes for fun scenarios. Certainly also makes for things that we don't need, like, charting quarterback stats from the first OTA. But again, man, y'all want to have fun with it. Knock yourselves out. It's your right just as much as anybody else's is to not get involved with it. So it was nice actually to have some, legit ball to talk about here again this week. All the speculation and, talking about, the things from the past month. It's always nice when we get new information and things that we can kind of, work and certainly give our opinions and our takes off of. And, certainly just going to continue to look forward to this, again, as the Browns will wrap everything up. I do again believe it is June 22nd. And that's, of course, when you get, your head coach to give the nice speech to everybody involved and say, we got 1 month. Everybody go have some fun. Everybody go relax, enjoy friends, family, don't get in any trouble. All, the good stuff of that last month before the boys start rolling in late July. And all of a sudden, now it legitimately matters again as the pursuit to 2025 begins. We are 100 days away from the Cleveland Browns home opener. I know it seems like forever, but now that it's summer, it's going to go by like that. As always, we appreciate you all for coming out to the OBR every single day, whether it is, again, reading the written content from the fantastic group of writers here at the OBR, or joining the OBR streaming network nightly beginning at 6 p.m. with me, host Jeff Lloyd here of Browns 3D. Friday, you will have Brad Ward, Things I Think I Know, coming up at 7 o'clock after this episode. So stick around. Make sure you subscribe to the OBR on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to the OBR on Twitch. This has been your daily delivery of all things dog pound. Browns 3D on the OBR, and everybody have a great weekend.